I'm so recording is now in progress. I'm so glad that you are joining me tonight, and I look forward to talking with you and learning more about the ways that we can support you in raising money in your congregation. We have a few learning objectives for this afternoon. We're going to start where all things about money start, and that's with gratitude. We're going to talk a little bit about gratitude practices that help us draw the connection between all that we've been given and all that we share and all that our church needs. And that is one of the core concepts of stewardship. It's about that reciprocity, giving and receiving and giving back. We're going to talk a little bit about money. Actually, we're going to talk a lot about money. And that's a hard thing to do in church. I want to acknowledge that right off. We often think that our faith and our money should be very separate conversations. We've been taught that in polite society. We don't mix those two. But I want to challenge that a little bit. And I want us to remember that in fact, Jesus spent a lot of his short 3 years of ministry with us, teaching and using money as an example. 40% of his parables, 16 out of 40, are about money, stuff, and possessions. And I think that's because money is a tool. It also can get in the way. It's also a great gift, and it's always going to be with us. So as a metaphor or as an actual lesson, Jesus talked about money a lot. And I think that's an invitation for us to be able to talk about money and our faith as well. Money and faith are pastoral issues at the end of it. When we're in conversations with each other, our sisters and brothers, about our gifts or about the needs of the congregation or about scary moments in our budgets or about great windfalls and surprise gifts that we've received. Those are all moments of one-on-one connection, pastoral moments that are real gifts if we treat them that way. So I would like us to be able to have a little facility to talk about money and meaning. We're going to talk a lot about choice making. We're going to talk about how our money gets used, sometimes for us, often by us, and ways that can change the world and what we can do with it. So we're going to go through a lot of scenarios about the ethics of our money and our values. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about how the choices we make about our money, about our saving, our giving, our spending, our investing, how those then can help the church do their work. So if anything strikes a chord, even feel free to disagree with me. I love this. I would love for us to engage in conversation as we go through this time together. With that, I will move us into our content. Choices matter. This is the theology of money and meaning in church. The decisions that we make on how we spend our time, how we spend our money, how we share our emotions, those are investments that are informed by our values. They are informed by the gospel. They're informed by what we hear on Sunday and what we do with that information when we move it out into our lives. Some choices, they limit us, right? So if we spend too much, we have less to give. If we give it all away, we have less to spend on our needs. So we're always looking for balance, right? Well, in stewardship, balance is about all of our values, and all of the decisions we make about our money end up being opportunities to engage in stewardship, in the care and creation of resources in our earth and in our communities. Let's start a little by talking about our gratitude. And I'd like to start this conversation with gratitude because Often when we talk about money and meaning, we're thinking in terms of not having enough of it, or maybe our anxiety about being asked for it or having to ask others. And so I want us to start in that more foundational place where we recognize the gifts that we have received and the gifts that we are about to give. Um, Often people incorporate sort of a daily habit, a discipline of gratitude, maybe upon waking or maybe at night as they're preparing to sleep, kind of thinking throughout the day, like, what am I grateful for? What happened today that moved me? What are my blessings? Counting our blessings. And I think that as a habit, and I call it a habit because gratitude isn't sometimes our first instinct. Sometimes our first instinct is to problem solve or to move right into action. But if we take sometimes that moment of introspection to say, how did I get where I am and why am I grateful for it? And who influenced me today? Or what beautiful thing did I see? Those are moments where we can engage our gratitude and then engage our creator in having given and provided those opportunities. We can make it a weekly habit. I have a good friend who closes, before he closes his laptop on Friday afternoon, he writes emails to the people on his team or the people he met that week who influenced him in some way, who did something great for him or for his church, who he's been thinking of, people who are on his heart. And he takes the time, sometimes it's just one sentence, to thank them. And it's a beautiful discipline. I try to do it every week, and sometimes Friday happens and I'm like, just get this thing done. I'm ready for the weekend. But it's a beautiful gift when we can remind ourselves that we're not in this alone, that people have been with us all week, been with us all month, been with us on our journey. And if we can take the time every once in a while to regroup and thank them for what they've done or what they've contributed or ideas that they've had, or even a conversation that made us think deeply about something. These are all great things to acknowledge in each other. One of the things that we are terrible about in our Protestant American values is accepting other people's gratitude toward us. It feels really hard sometimes to be able to accept somebody's thanks. And we always, we push it off. Oh, it's no problem. Don't think anything of it. When really, that was a gift that they just gave you. They took the time to say thank you. They had a moment of connection, something resonated. And I think often that first instinct we have to kind of step back from that moment rather than just absorb it and say, I'm glad I could do that, or I'm glad we had that conversation, or I'm grateful too, or whatever we want to say that keeps that moment going is helpful. And I think it's not always our first inclination. It's not mine. I'm always the stepping back kind of guy. Along with that, we need to think positively. We need to go into a situation assuming that the other person is a good actor. Assume goodwill. Assume that the person that we're encountering, whether that's on the other side of a counter or on the other side of an argument, or together in a project that we're working on, or just coming up to the communion rail together. We have to imagine that in that person's heart is a goodness and that they want the best thing to come out of the situation that we're both in at that moment. And this is really important. If we assume that the other person is coming at it from a good place, then we don't go with doubts or skepticism. And that's not to say we should always let our guards down. We know we have that instinct in the back of our head that says you should probably be guarded about this. But when we can let it down a little, when we can assume that somebody means the right thing, we see the world in so much more beautiful color, I think, when we can do that. Finally, a couple of easy ones, or I should say difficult ones, but easy to say. Forgive yourself. That's a part of gratitude too. Those things that we do, those foibles along the way, we need to be able to get over them so that we can move past them, so that we can acknowledge the goodness again in our own lives and in our relationships with others. Give second chances, and don't be so quick to say, I know how this is going to turn out, or we've been down this road before. Really try to assume that it's going to turn out all right. Why am I talking about all this before we start talking about money and our ethics and our values? Because it's our gratitude that is the foundation for these relationships. When we exchange money, we're creating relationship. It's not just transactional, it's also relational. And so we need to remember that when we do this with our church, when we do this in our spending, saving, investing, and giving, we are creating these relationships. And relationships are about gratitude and opportunity. Choices matter. I want to talk a little bit about how in our choice making we can be more aware. And this is where we start to move into the ethics of our thinking of money and meaning. When we're purchasing products and we're looking in the marketplace for something, one of the first questions we need to ask is, who made it? How did this product come to be? And what was their life like when they did it? Did they have access to union labor? Did they have a good working condition? Did they have a living wage? Were their basic rights met? And those are hard questions to know. We don't always know when a product comes to us in the marketplace, what is behind the factory experience of that, or what it is. I'm going to share some links at the very end, some websites that can help us when you're in the marketplace, that can help you think through those things. Learn a little bit more about the companies that make our things. Learn a little bit more about how we do it, because what we don't want to engage is spending our money on something that is a societal bad, that's a societal evil in some way, right? We want everything to be positive when we engage that conversation. What's it made from? So we've had who made it, what's it made from? Is it using new raw materials, or is it trying to find recycled or reused ways to create products that we need? And where did those raw materials come from? Did they, were they strip mined from something, or did we take them out of a process through some more gentle way of getting those ingredients, those raw materials? Again, when we look at those things, we make decisions. It happens often in things like toilet paper and paper towel. Is this coming from virgin forest, or is this coming from recycled product? And who wants to imagine cutting down a beautiful tree just to wipe our hands and throw it away, or wipe up a spill? So, those sorts of questions, where does it come from? It's our money being used to make this, to buy this. Let's understand where it's coming from. And then, where in the world does it come from? Are there large carbon miles attached to this product? Were there foreign policy implications? Was the economy of the country that this product was made in somehow impacted by our demand for it? Or are we in some sort of fair trade relationship? What do we do? And so these are big, huge questions to ask, right? They're policy questions, they're manufacturing questions. And it would drive us insane if we went down the grocery aisle and tried to ask and answer those questions over and over for every product that needs to be in our basket to take home. But if we can begin thinking that way about our bigger purchases, about our daily purchases, about the things that matter most to us, then we can start to help ourselves understand what the meaning of our money is and where it's going and how the ethics and values play into that. Our investing is almost as important as our purchasing, because when we put our money in the bank or when we use it to make more money for ourselves, we don't always control how that happens and what the processes that our banks or our financial institutions, our brokers, our money managers use to make that happen. We're focused, of course, on the good return, as we should be. We are investing this money. We are taking it out of our usable source and putting it someplace so that it does something. But we should be asking a couple of questions about the lending institutions or the banking institutions that we use and what their policies are. So we've all seen, and we still have in our memory, the banking crisis, the most recent banking crisis, and there have been so many in our lifetimes, whether it was the savings and loan bailout in the 80s or any number of the financial meltdowns that we had in the 2000s. We understand how banks are a part of that. And some of that is about legacy stuff, like how did they create mortgages? Did they engage in redlining in districts? Did they provide mortgages to some people and not to others based on their zip code or based on the color of their skin or based on other things that were a part that shouldn't have been a factor in how somebody got a mortgage? When we look at that in our bank and we realize that our banks can be a part of the systemic problem, we have to think, is this where I want my checking account? Maybe my money is going to good use, but that bank is making money off of my money when I'm not, when I'm sleeping. Is this what I want them to use their money, my money for? What are the policies of my mutual fund beyond its return? Is my mutual fund investing in things that might be against my values? And that's not to say that weapons or the military industry are bad things. It's saying that if they aren't aligned with you, then you should know that. If it's something you support, then it's something you support. When we're talking about ethics, we're never talking about absolute rights and absolute wrongs. We're talking about choice making. We're talking about what feels right, what is right, what does the most good in the world. So when we see these questions, they're not binary. They are all about a continuum and how we feel about it. Are we investing in foreign governments and in foreign products? Or are we investing in domestic things that help our own economy? And what about the use of technology? There's lots of money to be made in tech stocks. And then we see these great scandals erupt on what tech companies do with the data that they harvest from us and how that shapes our politics and our lifestyle and our economy and our society. So we ask questions. Where's our money going when we invest it? I'm going to go through a couple more of these, and then I'm going to pull up and ask for your questions or engage you in anything you might be thinking about this. Let's talk a little bit about our giving. So our purchasing, our investing, and now our giving. So certainly, what can be the ethical concerns about where we give our money away, right? Giving money away to charities should always be a good thing, except sometimes we need to look into the charity itself and make sure that it's doing something that we agree with and that we want. So what are the policies of the nonprofit that we are giving our money to? So of course, we're talking about stewardship and we're talking about our churches. We know, because we see those budgets, we know where the money's going. But as Episcopalians, we have more complicated giving values than just our church. We also give to nonprofits that matter to us, to our schools, to arts institutions, to environmental institutions, to political causes, to advocacy. These things all matter. And so let's take a look how does this nonprofit use my money? When I donate it, how are they engaging in advocacy? Are they hiring lobbyists to lobby politicians locally or federally? How do they manage their endowment? So they have money that needs to be invested. Are they using socially responsible investing? Or I should say, are they using an investment strategy that matches our own values and investments? Or are they doing something else? And then what's their ratio of program expenses to the money that they raise? Charity Navigator is a great website that allows you to look at, and they give every nonprofit a score on how they do their ratio. So if they're spending more than 12% of the dollar that they get on raising money, on asking people for money, there's a red flag that goes up in Charity Navigator, because it means that they're spending too much money trying to acquire more money. Or are they hiring and paying executives really high salaries, and then that leaves fewer funds for them to do their direct service? So we always have to look at that in terms of our nonprofits, and there are some really good tools out there to help us understand what our nonprofits are doing with their money. And board membership. Every nonprofit has a board of directors, people who advise them. And we often pick those boards of directors because they're well connected in the community. Are they working for companies that we support? Are they doing things in their lives that we agree with? Or do they work for companies that are undergoing scandals? I used to work, I'll tell this story. I used to work for an agency that worked with family homelessness here in San Francisco. And it was particularly about families who had lost their homes. This was in 2008 and 2009, 2010. So people who had lost their homes or had mortgages they never should have received, predatory lending and things like that. And we had on our board, because they were influential and important people in our community, we had executives who worked for a bank that was directly involved in the mortgage crisis. And we needed to ask ourselves, is it really a good idea for us to have this person who gives us a lot of money, who's really a great leader, who himself is a really nice guy? Should we have him on the board because he works for this company that sort of created the crisis that has created this homelessness experience of these families that we're working with? And so that helps us understand sometimes that these aren't just single issues. These aren't binary choices. We have to look into it and find the relation behind it so that we can understand, is the nonprofit, is our money that we are giving away being put to its best use and matching our values? Again, it all comes down to matching our values. Hopefully our values are shaped by the gospel and by our church and by our Sunday school and by the community that we create in our congregations. We need to ask more questions about our consumer power. We have a lot of consumer power. So one of the things that I think we always need to look at is, are we supporting the company or are we supporting the product? So that's to say, do I want this bag of coffee, and I'll get whatever bag on my list is bag of coffee. So I'll get whatever bag of coffee it is. That's buying for the product. But then I see that there's some fair trade certified coffee out there. And I understand that that means a certain set of criteria about that coffee, how it was grown, who picked it and what their conditions were, how it was brought to market, who got paid for it, things like that go into fair trade certified. And so is this important to me? Do I care about it enough to choose this bag of coffee in the marketplace over that bag of coffee in the marketplace? And is everything that fair trade certified, is everything on that seal something I want to support? Or are there things and products that maybe I don't want to support? So asking some deeper questions, looking at policies, looking deeper into the marketplace. Again, I realize that this means work, right? But it's our money and it's our values at stake. And so that's why we do this work and why we talk about this work. Another question that we want to always ask is this supporting our local economy or is this about our global economy? And do those two things need to be binary? There are some things that local producers do really well and some things that global producers do really well. Should we go all one way or all another? I know people who only buy locally. Their food is grown close to where they live. They buy products that are made in their community, and they don't buy things that have arrived on a container ship or have come from another place. That's their decision. And I wonder sometimes that's a beautiful decision. Do we need to do that with every product? Again, no right and wrong. Where do your ethics and where do your values align and match up so that we can talk about this? We spend a lot of time in our media talking about companies that we like and don't like, and there always seems to be someone on the news, some organization, some corporation that is doing something that has attracted the attention of the media positively or negatively. And sometimes that positive and negative is dependent on the people who are witnessing it, right? One company's positive could be another person's negative. And so we have a lot of conversation at the policy level, at the media level, around the water cooler, with some energy about companies that we should avoid and companies that we should engage. And I think this is a really fascinating conversation, one that we should have. We should take seriously the values of the corporations that matter to us, but we should know what our actions do. I think boycotts are really troubling. Whenever I hear the term, I think, are we really punishing the right people when we boycott something, right? Is it the executives that have made the policy that are going to feel the brunt of my boycott, or is it the minimum wage worker who might be the person who gets let go or has their hours cut or something like that? So it might feel good to boycott something, but then we need to ask, who is this impacting? Are the people who made the policy going to change their policy based on this? And it has to be a really big consideration. Sometimes it happens. We see it where a company walks back a statement or a policy because of social pressure, and that's great. But we also see times when it backfires and it's the person we don't intend to hurt who gets hurt in the process. I want to talk a little bit about consumerism and politics. This quote that somebody said, that shopping is more important than voting. My best friend and college roommate is now the executive director of an organization called Project Vote Smart. And it's a national advocacy organization that tries to get out information about every race, every politician, every argument, and just make sure that everybody has the most up-to-date information. He would argue that voting is the most important thing, and that shopping, how we spend our money, how we influence our economy is secondary. But I think that there are many of us who feel that money follows politics and politics follows money, and that where we spend our money or how we spend our money, where the marketplace leads, is where our politics and our policies will lead as well. So these are questions that we want to be asking when we're buying ethically. Do we want it to be about impact? What are we losing if we think just about product versus policy? I'm going to stop there and ask some questions before we talk about how we know what we don't know and how we can research this. I'd love to engage you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. Love to engage you in experiences or conversation of times when in your spending, saving, investing, giving, you've had to think about your values or create paths that matched your values, or you had maybe a ethical question about what you were doing and how you solved that. So I'd love to engage you on this. Tell me some stories. Somebody's got to go first.
I'll go first.
Thanks, Patty.
I had two small episodes, I guess. One of them was, excuse me, I'm a environmental science teacher. And so when the Exxon Valdez occurred, I was just devastated. And it sounds silly, but I still haven't forgiven Exxon for the way they handled the cleanup. So when I started my retirement plans, I discussed not investing in companies that work with fossil fuels with them. So that was one. And then the second one was grocery shopping, as you said. And my son was younger at the time, so I was buying him some cookies to put in his lunch. And I discovered that they were in a plastic mold, wrapped in foil, in a box that was then shrink wrapped. And so I could never buy those again. I had to write to the company and say, what in the world, 4 layers of packaging to get to cookies? So that was my two where my ethics got in the way.
Patty, I love those two examples, and they're so real because we are faced with that. Sometimes I look at packaging, I'm like, what is this ridiculous amount of packaging for the product that it is? What are they trying to protect? But so I really appreciate that. So my question to you about your investment portfolio is, when you said I'd like to exclude fossil fuels, how did your money manager deal with that? How easy was that, or difficult? What kind of a conversation was that?
Well, you're right. I would say that I have no way of actually knowing, because when your money is tied up in mutual funds or bonds, you don't really know where those are going. So I had to trust that they would respect my wishes based on our discussion.
Yeah, it is really hard to know. It's not impossible, but the level of research you need to do
Right.
about what your mutual fund is really investing in is
well,
really
and because I work for the school system, it's a 403B,
yeah.
and the school system determines who runs it. And so since I've been with the school system, we're probably on our 4th company. And I have no way of knowing that my wishes are being passed on.
Well, it's good that you keep asking for them, because that's also how change happens. Thanks, Patty. Those are great examples. Are there other examples that folks would like to share into the room?
As a small business owner, we were constantly asked to donate to this and that and the other thing. And we developed a rule of thumb that we did look at the compensation for the executives of the charities to which we were going to be giving. And if they did not meet our criteria, we did not give them. And sometimes some of our employees were very distraught about that because it was a charity that was sacred to them, but we saw that, or we felt that the executives were overcompensated for what they were doing.
That's a great policy to have, and you had to do a little work to get to that number, to learn that. And as you said, you know, it's an issue that your employees cared about. It's an issue that you might care about, and so it ends up being a difficult decision. You have to make a stand
Mhm.
for policy, and that's not always easy to do. So I really appreciate that you did that, and that you found a way through that. Thanks for that. That's a great story too. Are there any others that folks would like to share, moments where they uh, had to think about what they were buying or how they were investing, or where their money sits? Yeah. Nancy, you're muted. You need to hit the right button. There you go.
I retired from a nonprofit, and we always check Charity Navigator. Of course, we were part of that also, but I never give personally to any charity unless I've gone to Charity Navigator and checked every detail about it. And on my church's outreach committee, whenever, we are always receiving solicitations on a national level, local level. And I always say, let's see what Charity Navigator says, because I know, like Betty was saying, there's some organizations that people have been giving to for years. And when they stopped and looked at that, they said, oh my gosh, I had no idea their executive is paid, $1.1 million a year, and 60% goes to the program, and I'll never give to them again. So no, that's a very wise thing to do.
And it's even wiser, Nancy, when you're talking about the church's money, right? So these are gifts that people have made through their faith. They put them in the plate. They've been held up and blessed and given to the glory of God. And so then when we invest them in other outreach, we want to make sure that that it's doing the right thing, that it matches, again, the values that we believe in the gospel, that we read and hear about, and make sure that it's matched up. So that's really important. Churches get into this also with their endowments, who's managing church investments, and a lot of churches elect to go with Episcopal Church Foundation, or to lump it in with the Episcopal Church's endowment at 815 in New York, because they can, that's passed by General Convention. They've sort of put the policy in place of what they're going to allow to be invested and what they won't. And that change, we'll see it again in Baltimore this summer. There will be some changes to companies that get excluded and industries that get included. You know how we do that. It's our church polity. So a lot of times it's really helpful if a congregation wants to have an endowment, that they use what their diocese uses, or what Episcopal Church Foundation says, or put it right in with the whole endowment of the Episcopal Church. And then that it's going to something that the church believes in, and because they have people who are very serious about scanning those mutual funds and those investments to make sure that they're going the right way. So I really appreciate when we're using church funds to invest, or to invest in our community, that we're extra careful about it. Any other stories before we move into other parts of this? We'll have more time to chat in a bit. All right, I'm going back to just sharing my screen. So we talked a little bit, and Charity Navigator is this website, this tool, and it's certainly about looking at nonprofits. But there are lots of places that we can go for information on investing, on purchasing, on saving, on banking regulations and institutions. And so, I want us to be more familiar with those tools, and I'll share the list at the end of all the links that I know of. But it's really important that we do this work, because we risk being complicit with unfair or unsustainable or unreasonable policies if we don't do the work and inform ourselves about where our money is going. There's this great example, a few years ago, there were these 1-for-1 startup shopping that would happen with Warby Parker, with Bombas socks, with Tom's shoes, and other things. And it sounded great, right? You buy a pair of shoes for yourself, and someone in a village in Africa or South America gets a pair of shoes. And that sounds like a good thing to do. Okay, I just went shopping, I got something I needed, and somebody else on the other side of the world got something they needed. And that felt like a good thing until we read the article that, the villages that were receiving all of these shoes, it was putting the local shoe manufacturer, like the local, what's it, cobbler. The local cobbler was going out of business because people weren't buying their shoes anymore. They were waiting for these shipments of free shoes to come. And so then what? So then we put someone out of business, so that then they can't make money for their family. And then what are they relying on? Free shoes from someone else? So these ideas that seem really good, and have some sort of a ethical place at their heart, we need to look into them. Or sometimes, as in a startup, it was meant to disrupt an industry and they didn't know what was going to happen. And so they had to kind of relook at this and think, maybe we shouldn't be sending shoes to some place where there's already a shoemaking industry, because then we're disrupting their economy, and that economy doesn't need disrupting. So these things are part of what we look at, and what we have to look at when we peel back the onion of some of our purchasing decisions. Another way that we learn what we don't already know is by listening, deep listening. And it's the stories that you share with each other, some of the stories that you were sharing just now, helps us when we talk about it, when we share those stories, we amplify the gospel, we amplify what we learn in church and how we learn it together, and we put into practice our faith and our formation. So when we listen to each other, we really listen to the stories that we tell. We hear their pain or their struggle. We hear their reason behind it, why this matters to them. Why did it matter that 4 layers of packaging was one was a bridge too far? Telling that story helps us then think about it. It triggers it in ourselves, and we can then share that learning on. We develop empathy. We're not just mindless consumers or spenders or savers or players in the market. We are deep people who are informed by our ancient faith that comes alive when we engage it in conversation, in communion, in the kinds of activities that we do when we share at church. So empathy is a part of that deep listening. And it helps us be accountable to each other. When we're deeply listening to each other, we're aware of how we sound and what others are saying and how we recognize our own stewardship. Everything that exists has been given by God for our use. And how we use that is the essential piece of our stewardship ministry. If we turn it back around and serve the world and our neighbors with it, we are then keeping that goodness of creation going. And we serve our neighbors in many ways by engaging in the market, by buying things that we need that then give somebody else a job and an income, but also by the ways that we give our gifts freely in terms of our charity, in terms of our investing in local economy and community. So these are really important things that we do as stewards of all that we've been given. And then sharing. So deep listening then gives us holy sharing. And I've put two stories here that have been told to me by people who were really trying to make the right decision about products and about their purchasing. Sumit is a good friend of mine and a faithful Episcopalian. And he left his bank, which is one of the big flagship banks, because it had participated in predatory lending that was involved in the mortgage crisis. And it was a real soul-searching moment for him to take a look at where his money, and he had a lot of money, as we often do, credit cards and mortgages and loans and checking accounts and savings accounts. Those can all be tied up into our banking institution. And he pulled his money out and went somewhere else that did match his values because he was really disgusted by what he'd learned about how his bank, his money, was then complicit in other people's suffering. We're never going to be free from causing suffering. Unfortunately, that's part of the problem of money. But we can do the best that we can with it and ensure that the best happens and that more good than harm comes from our practices. And another comes from a member of my own congregation here in San Francisco. And Megan, they can't eat dairy. And they really liked almond milk. But here in California, one of the things we know is that water is in very short supply. And almonds are a real guzzler of water. It takes an enormous amount of water and land to produce almonds. And it requires an enormous amount of almonds to create almond milk. And so they were really upset that this product that was, that they were adding to their coffee and to their eggs and to their baking and all these things was actually destructive to the land and water and workers that had to produce it. And so they found yet another way, another kind of milk way, or a way to eliminate milk altogether. They decided, just not to put it in their coffee and to find other ways to do their baking. And that was really important to them. So when we take, these seem like really singular examples, and we might say, well, they really rabbit holed on this thing. They really went in deep. on this thing and they did a lot of work and it really mattered to them. But this is what we do when we put our ethics in play, when we take a look at how our ethical system influences our spending and our saving. Can Megan do this with every product that they encounter? They wouldn't have time to ever do anything else if they just researched and thought deeply about these things. But we pick the things that we start with and we add to that practice and we add to that practice. And it's like any discipline. It's like our gratitude. It's like our stewardship. It's like our faith. It just grows. And this is what we are called to do as stewards. When we create a theology of abundance and generosity, when we do the work of deep listening and holy sharing and research, asking the questions that need to be asked, we begin to create that relational theology where we are in alignment with the gospel. The gospel is alignment with the needs of the world, and we're all participating in that cycle together. I love this quote from Henry Nouwen from his book, Spirituality of Fundraising. He says, our humanity comes to its fullest bloom in giving. We become beautiful people when we give whatever we can give, a smile, a handshake, a kiss, an embrace, a word of love, a present, a part of life, all our life. This is the theology, the stewardship of our choice making and where we intersect our money and our meaning. It is a deeply Christian conversation. It's a conversation about love and access and opportunity. I will share these slides so that you can take these links and go deeper into them. These are sort of my favorite ones to go to in addition to the Charity Navigator that we've already spoken about. But this will help you when you want to do some research on organizations and see where their materials come from, what their trade practices are. Out here, we have this beautiful thing called the Monterey Bay Aquarium. It's just south of San Francisco, and part of their nonprofit organization creates seafoodwatch.org, which tells you, and they change it all the time based on fisheries, what are safe fish to eat, what are, starting to become overfished, and what fish you should avoid. And they actually give you a little card you can carry in your wallet. So when you're in a restaurant and you're tempted by the fish special, you can say, well, oh, is this on the list or not? Or you can pull out your phone, as we now do, and go to their website. It's a great tool to help us understand, in my enjoyment of something, am I creating opportunity or am I creating harm? And those are unfortunate but necessary ideas that we have to think through so that we are creating opportunity for the world. I'd like to stop my sharing again and share with you and hear what you might have to say about experiences of anything related to this. Let's engage in some deep listening and some holy sharing. You've already shared some stories. If you have others that you'd like to talk about, or maybe questions you have, or maybe something you disagree with that we've talked about here, I'd love to hear it. It's the end of a long day. I have a soothing voice. Maybe you're starting to fall asleep. Is there anything else you'd like to bring into this conversation? Over the course of the spring and summer, as we do these webinars, this is probably the most esoteric one that we'll be doing. We'll be getting a little bit more practical as we get through and closer to fall campaign season. Our next conversation is going to be really about how do we look at the finances of our church and how do we make sure that they match up with, how do we talk about our budget as a document of hope, as a document of vision. So we'll be doing some work on looking at our numbers and reframing it in a way that we can share the good news. Often we don't think of budgets as good news documents, but they can be if we talk about them the right way and if they tell the story of what we're doing. So we'll get a little bit more practical in our next session and as we move through the summer. This was our first foray into sort of engaging this conversation about theology and ethics as it comes with our money and our values. I would love to offer a last opportunity for anyone to say anything before we say goodnight. I deeply appreciate your attention and your participation in this. Please come back for more. I know that Lynn Farland has a great plan for formation. In fact, I think she's a pretty amazing person. I recruited her last year to be on the board of TENS because she has great vision and great energy and good ideas. So you have a really great staff member at your diocesan level who's dedicated to making sure that congregations thrive. And this is one of the ways that we're working together. With that, it's what time is it there? 7:30 for y'all. So enjoy your evening. I will send you all out an email with the video and the slides. And we'll see you, I think at the end of May, we're all getting together again. All right, friends. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you so much.